Good morning. Welcome to your math lesson on Wednesday, April the 22nd. We are starting a new chapter. We are finished with fractions for now. And, well, kind of. I shouldn't say that because look at the page. We are starting a chapter on decimals, which is really the same as fractions. So it is showing you at the beginning here at the top of the page how decimals and fractions are the same. They're different ways of representing the same number. So they both are showing parts. Okay, so I am on page 297. 297. Go ahead and tear that out and get that out with me. And so decimals are fractions that are using a base of 10. So we can have a base of 10, then we have hundredths, and then we have thousandths, then it goes to 10,000ths, 100,000ths, okay? So it's based off of 10. So actually the fractions with decimals are very easy because the bottom is the denominator is always going to be a form of 10, meaning that it's going to end in 0. So it might be 10, 100, or 1,000. Usually that's what we're dealing with is 10, 100, or 1,000. So if you look at the chart, remember we have the decimal here. So this is where your decimal is. If I go to the left of the decimal, okay, this side, I have whole numbers. So I have how many in the ones place? A 4. There's nothing in the tens and there's nothing in the hundreds. So my whole number is a 4. So just like we said that all whole numbers for fractions can have the whole number over 1, every whole number when we're thinking about decimals has a little decimal behind it. Okay? We don't always use it, especially if there's no parts. We just write the 4. But if there are parts, then we need to bring that decimal out. So we have ones. Now we have the decimal. Right after the decimal is the tenths place. THS at the end, tenths. So it can be 1 over 10, 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10. Now when I get to 9 out of 10, and then I bump to 10 out of 10, that gives me another whole. I bump up to a whole. And then, or I can add another part here. So this is tenths, this is hundredths, just like the chart shows, and then 1,000ths. So tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And look, how many zeros are in a 10? 1. So it is in the first place. How many zeros are in 100? 2. So it is in the second place after the decimal. In 1,000, there's 3 zeros. So that's the third place after the decimal. Okay? So now we're going to look at some grids that give you a certain amount of filled in boxes, and we're going to write the fraction and the decimal for it. So when I see this grid, I know that this is a grid of 100 because it's 10 by 10. So they want the decimal form first and the fraction form next. So all I need to do for the decimal form, I count my rows. So I've got 2 full rows, which would be 20. And then I have 8. So that's 28. So I'm going to do a decimal and then 28. See my decimal there? A decimal and 28, and we call this 28 what? How do we say it? 28 hundredths, which means that I'm going to have 100 on the bottom. 28 hundredths. So it's 28 out of 100. So now here, this one doesn't have 100. This only has 10. So this is out of 10. How many out of 10? 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is only going to have a tenths place. So it is going to be 0.4, but we don't say 0.4, we say 4 tenths. And when I write that as a fraction, That's the beauty of knowing how to say decimals. If you know how to say it, then you'll know how to write it in fraction form because it's the same. 4/10, and then I write 4/10. Got it. Okay, now this one again is out of 10. How many out of 10? 7, right? So it is 0.7. 7/10. 7/10. Now I have the grid that has 100 on it. So this is going to be out of 100, which means I'm going to have 2 numbers after my decimal. So what are my numbers going to be? Let's see, 10, 20, 30, 40, 53. 53, and then I'm going to put that 53 over the 100. 53 hundredths. Now look at this grid. This is another 100. Now this is easier. Instead of counting it up, how many of you already thought, oh, there's 2 missing, so that means that all of this is going to be 98. So 98 hundredths, and then I'm going to write it this way, 98 hundredths. Pretty simple so far, right? Okay, now we're going to change the fraction to decimal form. 2 out of 100. If it is coming out of 100, that means it needs to be in the second place, right? So if it's in the second place, I have to fill in a 0 and then put the 2. 2 hundredths. I'm going to put my decimal here, 8/10. Oh, only 1. Now another thing to do is match up your numbers on the top with the zeros on the bottom. If they match, you don't have to add any zeros. Here, see, they didn't match. There was 1 extra 0, which means that that extra 0 is going to be in the front. Cool, huh? Okay, so this one's just going to be decimal 8, which would be 8/10. This one, look at your numbers and your zeros. Do they line up? Yep, I have a number for every 0. So that means that I can just write 179, and I've got my decimal out front. That's going to be 179 thousandths. Do my numbers and zeros line up on this one? I've got a 4 and 1 0, 7 and another 0. Yep. So this is going to be 47 hundredths. Now what about this one? I've got 2 numbers. Uh-oh, and how many zeros? 3. That means that that extra 0 comes up in front of that number. And now I have 19 thousandths so that it's in the proper place. 19 thousandths. Now we're going to go the other way. Okay? This is where I said if you know how to read your decimals, it'll be really easy to write the fractions. Because if I could read this, I can write it. So this is going to be 7 what? It's in the second place over, which is 7 hundredths. Another way to know is that you're going to need a 0 on the denominator for every place you have behind the decimal. Okay? So if I write that number on top, 39, there's 2 numbers there behind the 0. That means that I need to write 2 zeros on the denominator. So 39 hundredths. If I read this, that is 80 hundredths. Okay, this one, there's 3 numbers there, so 543. So I'm going to need 3 zeros on the denominator, which is going to make that 1,000. Okay, same thing here. So you're going to put 125 on the top and 1,000 on the bottom. It's a little hard for me to use those pens. You do it. 125 over 1,000. Okay, look at the bottom of this. Write the value of 5 in the number. All that means is they want you to say where it is in relationship with the decimal, basically. So if you have 5, that is a whole 5. So we're just going to write 5 because it is in the ones place. This 5 is in the tenths place, so we're going to put a decimal and then write the 5 directly after it because we're showing that it is 5/10. Here it is in the thousandths place, so we are going to turn everything else in front of it into zeros and keep the 5 where it was in that number. Do you see? Everything else turned to zeros. So the same thing here. I'm going to turn, that's already a 0, and I'm going to keep that 5 there to show that it's in the hundredths place. That's it. Okay, now circle the digit in the place listed. I'm going to use my highlighter here. So in the place listed, tenths, this TH here means that that's going to be behind the decimal. And remember, 1 0, 1 place. So that's going to be the 6. Thousandths, that TH means it's going to be behind the decimal. Thousand has 3 zeros, so it's the number in the third place, which is the 3 there. Ones place, ones, so that's a whole number, and that's going to be that 5 right there in front of the decimal is the ones place. And then hundredths place, again, we've got the TH, which means it's after the decimal. 2 zeros, 2 places, so that means it's the 3. The 3 is in the hundredths place. Okay, let's look at the back together. Change my pen back. Okay, write the decimal for the word form. So again, if you know how to say them, then you're going to be able to write them easily. For and. Remember, and is the name for the decimal. This is and. Nice to meet you. And 4 and 12 hundredths. Okay, let me think. 100 has 2 zeros. 12 has 2 digits, so we're good. We don't have to add any zeros. 4 and 12 hundredths. 33 thousandths. That means I'm going to be behind a decimal. Thousandths has 3 zeros. 33 has only 2 numbers. So that means I'm going to need to add a 0 in front, not behind. 33 thousandths. 172 thousandths. Am I going to need to add a 0? Thousand has 3 places, 3 zeros, and I've got 172. So I'm good. 411 thousandths. Again, this just goes behind the decimal. There is no and there, so there is no whole number. It doesn't say 4 and, it says 411 thousandths, so it goes behind the decimal. Now, this is what we did on the front. This is what I want you to practice on your own because we did exactly these on the front. So I want you to look at the front, go back and forth if you need a little bit of a reminder. Look at the place value chart. Fill the missing labels. Write the number 274 thousandths. 274 thousandths. So there's no and there, which means there's no whole numbers. We don't need that. So we do need 274 thousandths. And we need to write in the names here. What are they missing here? This place is called the tenths, and this place is the tens. I'm not a very good writer with this pen. Tens, and write tenth on this one. Okay, let's look at this part together because this can be a little confusing sometimes. It says, if 1 whole equals 10 tenths, 100 hundredths, and 1,000 thousandths, then 4 wholes equals how many tenths? If 1 whole is 10, 4 holes is 40 tenths. And 400 hundredths, and 4,000 thousandths. If 5/10 equals 50 hundredths, then 5/10 equals 500 thousandths. If 700 thousandths equals 7 hundredths, then 7 hundredths equals 7 tenths. We went backwards on that one. If 1/4 equals 25 hundredths, then 1/4 equals 250 thousandths because I'm just moving over one place. Explain how 2/10ths, 200ths, and 2,000ths are different. What I would write here is the 2 has a different value. The 2 has a value of tenths here, that has a value of hundredths, and then it has a value of thousandths. So I would write the 2 has a different value. Word problem. Miss Rose has 17 cookies left in a bag that held 100 cookies. Write the fraction form and the decimal form of the cookies left. So she has 17 left out of 100. There is my fraction. Then, decimal form, 17 hundredths. You did it. Our first lesson for this section in decimals. Make sure you go back and answer 28 through 35. And then in your comments, I want you to tell me a way in real life that we use decimals. Where is a time that we're going to see decimals used? Go.